Hi everyone, and welcome to Teach Me in 10, the video series brought to you by Technology Networks. Here we invite scientists to describe their research area in less than 10 minutes. My name is Rhianna Lilly, and I'm an editorial assistant for Technology Networks. Our guest here today is Professor Lawrence Young, a professor of molecular oncology at the University of Warwick. Young is internationally recognised for his work on the role of virus infection in the pathogenesis of various tumours. Today, he is going to teach us about different viruses that can cause cancer and how they can be crucial targets for diagnosis, treatment, and prevention.
So the association of viruses with the development of cancer goes back many, many years, probably a couple of hundred years actually. We've understood for years that certain viruses are associated with the development of cancer in animals, but it took until the 1960s actually for us to pin down the fact that viruses can actually be involved in the development of human cancer. It's interesting if you look back at the history of our understanding of cancer over many, many years, it's very tied up with our understanding of viruses, and they've sort of informed each other, those two areas. So perhaps it didn't come as a big surprise that in 1964 a virus associated with human cancer was discovered by a guy called Tony Epstein, and that led to a virus that's named Epstein-Barr virus, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. What's interesting though, it was in 1911, or when a guy working in the States, a guy called Peyton Rouse, discovered a virus associated with the spread of a tumor in chickens. And that started an interest in this whole area, actually, of can viruses be associated with human cancer? But nobody really believed that. They thought that this was something that was limited only to animals. And then after almost more than 50 years, when Epstein-Barr virus was discovered in 1964, this led to the discovery of other viruses associated with human cancer. And indeed, in 1966, as a very old man, Peyton Rouse, who'd made that original observation in 1911, got the Nobel Prize because the virus associated human cancers has started to be discovered. And now we're left with something like about 7 viruses that we know for sure are directly associated with cancer in humans, and we believe there will be many more. So about 10 to 15% of all cancers worldwide are associated with virus infections. And the reason this is important is twofold, really. One is because it provides us with a clue to how cancer is caused. If we can identify specific factors that are directly associated with cancer, it helps us understand the process of all cancers, actually. But just as, if not more important, is the fact that we can do something about those cancers. And the best examples then of the association of a virus called hepatitis B virus with liver cancer and the association of human papillomaviruses with cervical cancer. And for both of those viruses, we have vaccines that can be given to prevent those cancers. Some very exciting data recently demonstrated that the HPV vaccine program, which started in about 2008 in young girls in the UK, has resulted in almost a complete absence of cervical cancer in young women, and it looks like we're going to be able to completely eradicate cervical cancer, at least in the West, where the vaccine is available, and hopefully worldwide as that vaccine is spread across the world. With that HPV, it was even more interesting because very early on, it was discovered that this hepatitis B virus is transmitted from mothers to babies during birth. And you could see in certain countries, like in Japan, for instance, that youngsters were getting liver cancer. And so what they do there, and what they still do, is vaccinate babies at birth against hepatitis B. We don't do that in this country because hepatitis B isn't such a big problem here. But in those countries, they started this program, and they could easily demonstrate then, within 10 to 15 years, that they'd eradicated liver cancer. So it's really exciting from that perspective. There are different types of viruses, as we know, that have different types of genomes. Some of them have DNA, some of them have RNA, and both of those are associated with human cancers. And the virus that I've worked on for nearly 40 years now, Epstein-Barr virus, is associated with a range of different tumors that affect different tissues in our bodies. Some of them affect the blood system and result in lymphomas. And some of these cancers associated with Epstein-Barr virus occur in the head and neck region. When you study all these viruses and you put them all together, and you think, well, are there some common factors there? You do find a few interesting things that tell you that that viruses alone aren't the sole cause of cancer. That we've known for years, of course, that cancer is a multifactorial disease. There are many factors working together that lead from a normal cell to a cancerous cell. It's just not one change. And in the same way, you can't just get cancer from a virus. And so if you look, what you find is there's a long so-called latency period between infection and developing cancer. So Epstein-Barr virus is the example I'll give you, where most of us get infected very, very early in life. It's the most common virus infection in humans. 95% of us are infected, but only a small proportion of individuals get the cancer. And it's after many, many years of being infected. And what that tells you is the virus is important, but it's just one stepping stone on the way to getting cancer. And it's not the only thing. Having said that, if it's a vital stepping stone and you take that stepping stone out using a vaccine, then it doesn't matter what the other factors are, what the other exposures are in the environment that contribute to cancer, you can prevent that cancer. And that's what we found with the papillomavirus and hepatitis B associated cancers. It's a bit more difficult for Epstein-Barr virus because there are vaccines in development, but it's really hard to prevent infection. And so the other side of this, the flip side of all of this, is can you use vaccines therapeutically? So rather than trying to prevent, which is what we'd love to be able to do for all these tumors, and indeed, of course, there's some very exciting developments in cancer vaccines generally, but most of these are used not to prevent, but to treat and hopefully cure. So you use the vaccines therapeutically. And that's really, there's a lot of interest in this presently, because we know that for some non-virus associated cancers, there's some very exciting data, particularly for melanoma, a form of skin cancer, where you can develop vaccines. And the hope is that we can develop vaccines that will also treat these virus associated cancers. And there are many different approaches that are being used, but some of this now, of course, has been helped and supported by the rapid development of new technologies in vaccines, particularly the mRNA vaccines that we're familiar with as a consequence of their use and the successful application against SARS-CoV-2 in the COVID pandemic. So there's lots of interesting aspects of that. And studying these virus-associated cancers and thinking about therapeutic vaccines has helped to think about how we develop vaccines for all cancers. And this is another important lesson. And a good example of that in terms of the other side of this, which is how can we diagnose cancer more effectively. Early diagnosis is really key in cancer, because early diagnosis means that you can treat the cancer more effectively. And a way to actually cure cancer is to detect the tumor very early and then remove the tumor surgically before it's spread in the body. One way to do this is to use biomarkers in the blood. And the gold standard biomarker actually for virus associated cancers is the Epstein-Barr virus, because we're all infected with it. We've got very low levels of this virus circulating in our B cells in our blood. But actually, if you have a cancer associated with Epstein-Barr virus, you have more of that in your blood, and we can detect that. It's called a liquid biopsy. You take blood and you can detect higher levels of EBV, and that's associated with the development of cancer. It means probably somewhere in your body there's a small tumor, but it's also useful if you start treating people. So if you have an EBV associated tumor and you have treatment, you can see levels of the Epstein-Barr virus DNA in the blood going down. And if it starts to come up again, you know there's cancer coming back somewhere. And that actually has been shown to be useful in detecting tumors before you can see them, even on a sophisticated scanning, like MRI scanning. And there's also been a big study in Hong Kong where there is an increased risk of developing this particular tumor associated with Epstein-Barr virus called nasopharyngeal cancer, where they were able to screen the whole population and identify a few people who had higher levels of Epstein-Barr virus on 2 repeat blood samples 6 months apart. And they were able to identify people with stage 1 disease, the earliest form of the cancer, which can be cured. In fact, in that instance, the tumor can be cured with radiotherapy. So this idea of being able to measure DNA from a tumor, in this instance from a virus-associated tumor in the blood, is something that's really exciting. And at the moment, there are lots of developments in cancer where you can start to see useful opportunities to detect early cancer in patients with all sorts of different cancers, including lung cancer and bowel cancer, the more common cancers, just by taking a blood sample. There's a big trial going on at the moment in the NHS looking at that approach. I'd like to think a lot of this has actually been informed by studying virus-associated cancer. So the EBV blood test, for instance, is the gold standard for how you can detect a cancer, and it gives us an example of how you can use similar technology to detect more common cancers. And I think that's the take-home message, really, is that from studying these virus-associated cancers, they're really interesting in themselves. There's a lot more to learn about them, particularly the fact that they're very different geographically, that a lot of these tumors associated with viruses are more common in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Far East, and we still don't really understand why. But nevertheless, as we learn more about virus-associated cancers, not only can we use new approaches to diagnosis and treatment of those cancers, we can use similar technologies and approaches for all cancers, and that's what's really exciting about this field of virus-associated cancers.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. A big thank you for joining us here today at Teach Me in 10. If you'd like to learn more about viruses and cancer or Professor Lawrence Young's work, make sure to check out the resources linked in the video description down below. Stay tuned for our next installment of Teach Me in 10.